Let's pick up on this discussion now. President Cyril Ramaphosa says several agreements are expected to be signed between South Africa and a number of countries during the BRICS Summit. He says the BRICS gathering is of fundamental importance as the world prepares to discuss major issues at this summit. Let's remind you, more than 30 heads of state and government from across the globe are expected to attend the summit this week. Well, let's discuss this now. And we're joined by Wits Business School and legal analyst Patrick Kadima, who is with me in studio this morning. Thank you very much, Patrick, for making the time. Let's start with the President's speech. Last night, reiterating the importance of BRICS expanding. We know that there are some 20 countries who have now formally applied to be part of the BRICS grouping, and then there is an interest from 67 others to also form part of this grouping. So that's one element that stood out for me. But the other one, again, reiterating the non-aligned stance of South Africa when it comes to our country's foreign policy, and in particular, that particular war that is ongoing between Russia and Ukraine.
Thank you, Kole, and good morning to your viewers. So first of all, I would like to begin with highlighting the invitation that has been extended to other heads of state.
Yeah.
Yesterday or a day ago, we came across a statement from the Moroccan Foreign Ministry, a very strong-worded statement that was directed to Pretoria, stating that Pretoria had not invited them and they did not even want to be part of this BRICS summit due to Pretoria's dogmatic position on the issue between Morocco and Western Sahara.
Yeah.
Now, this statement, when one reads it, continues lashing out to Pretoria, stating that, in fact, Pretoria does not have capacity sort of to host such a summit, and continues lashing out, in fact, by saying that Pretoria did not consult with other BRICS countries in terms of extending invitations to other heads of states.
Yeah.
This is really bizarre coming from Morocco as one of the key players in the African region. And I think yesterday the President did highlight the issue on where Pretoria stands in terms of the issue of between Morocco and Western Sahara.
Yeah.
Now, the invitation of other African heads of state as well as leaders from outside the Caribbean and so on and so forth is significant because this puts South Africa in the limelight and in the spot globally and regionally as a key player that cannot be just discarded.
Yeah.
And one other issue is that, having, I think, more than 30 heads of states from Africa, that's more than half of the heads of states.
Yeah.
In terms of the number of African countries that will be landing here in South Africa, and it's really significant, and one must commend the big diplomatic exercise that has gone into hosting such a conference.
Yeah.
Others have lamented that this is an exercise that China would want to participate in because it would want to grow its influence in the continent as well as globally. One other thing in terms of non-alignment, one notices yesterday as well, the President emphasized this, went in depth about South Africa being non-aligned and being part of the 120 member countries in terms of the non-alignment forum. It's particularly interesting as we see because he yesterday emphasized that they will not allow South Africa and to a certain extent Africa to be part of global powers fighting. And stated and gave even a historical perspective about how Africa was undermined during the Cold War,
sure,
by being aligned to global powers.
Let me ask this question. For South Africa, what is quite clear in terms of its agenda is for the rest of the African continent to be part of the BRICS formation in order to exploit the trade and investment opportunities. And in particular, we know that there is this mechanism, it's called the African Continental Free Trade Area. How important is that, you think, that South Africa stresses the importance of other African nations being part of the BRICS formation? And do you think that that is something that really has garnered interest from the leaders on the continent?
Yeah, definitely, and that's why they will be landing here. Starting from yesterday, we saw some landing into the country. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a very important, should I say, a treaty or document that the African Union has come up with. It serves to try to grow trade between African countries. You know, Africa has been closed to itself for many years, you know, since states started getting independence. You know, trade between African countries is very low. You know, some of the major trade partners of African countries are outside and not in the continent. But one other thing that I think my colleagues and other scholars have written on this issue is that you cannot speak on the African continental free trade area without speaking about the issue of how the movement of people will merge into this, because goods are not going to move themselves.
Sure.
It will need somebody in Libya to move those goods to probably Morocco, you know, or to the Democratic Republic of Congo. But there are issues there because Africa has been close to itself. So you will need a visa. You'll have to wait probably for a long time for your visa to be approved for you to be able to move those goods. And speaking about the African Continental Free Trade Area in isolation, without understanding how visas will be, you know, put in place for people to move these goods and services, is, I think, it's not going to hold water.
Yeah. The other element, though, Patrick, and quite a controversial one, is that this BRICS Summit takes place during a period of turmoil on the continent. We have had several coups in the West African region, the latest being Niger. But what makes it very interesting for me is you have a BRICS partner in the form of Russia, whose paramilitary group, and I don't know how much ownership the Russian Federation would want to take of the existence of the so-called Wagner group, that grouping seems to be siding with the coup plotters or with the military junta in the West African region. How does that tally with the continent trying to silence the guns, as we heard the president say yesterday, because the silencing of the guns extends to fostering peace and stability in order for trade to take place? How does that work? How do they address that with Russia?
That's a difficult one. But, you know, let me just highlight, you know, with what you have said, it's important first to note that, you know, in fact, even France wanted to be invited to join this BRICS Summit, and they were not sent an invitation. And Pretoria, I think, did that deliberately to make sure that, you know, it does not anger its other, you know, partners in this BRICS forum, you know. So it is important that, you know, the conflict, you know, conflicts in Africa are sorted out, you know. And I think security is one of the issues that will be on the main agenda in this upcoming BRICS Summit. And if security is not dealt with, you know, it might lead to, you know, the slowness of the African Continental Free Trade Area being implemented and so on and so forth. And we have seen China time and again not involving itself in issues of domestic affairs in its partners' countries, you know. And I think South Africa would have to take a stand. It has been a major role player in trying to bring about peace on the continent. You know, yesterday the president didn't mention silencing the guns, didn't mention the coups, but surprisingly, and maybe it is not upon him because he's not the African Union chairperson currently, he did not go deep into speaking about the coups that are happening currently in West Africa. And we have seen from ECOWAS the regional economic organization in West Africa, saying that they would want to intervene militarily, you know, in Niger. But this has faced a lot of hurdles, you know, signifying that a once glorious regional organization, ECOWAS, you know, that was known to intervene very quickly in issues of its member states, has really weakened, you know. In fact, Nigeria, one of the key role players in that organization, or in that forum, the Nigerian president faced significant backlash from his own senators, who said they do not want the army to be deployed, you know. And now you have this, then you have a weakened African Union, with just releasing statements and saying we will sanction Niger and so on and so forth. And you wonder, where are we going with this? What's happening with the regional organizations, you know, that are responsible for intervening and restoring peace and security in their member states, you know? I mean, if the African Union fails to restore peace in its own member states, I can't expect much from the BRICS, because it's different countries, you know, with different interests, you know, and expecting these countries that are outside of Africa to help you restore peace, I think it's a pipe dream. It needs to start at home.
We're going to have to see how those discussions are going to pan out over the course of the 3 days that BRICS Summit starting on Tuesday, which is tomorrow.